You know, I never thought I'd be sitting here telling you this story. I mean, people disappear all the time, right? Accidents happen. But what happened to us, it wasn't an accident. It was something else. Something evil. It started with an innocent idea. A family weekend getaway to reconnect. My wife Emma thought it'd be great for us and our two kids, Lily and Ethan, to spend some time away from the chaos of city life. So I booked a cozy lakeside cabin I found online. The pictures showed crystal clear water, tall pines swaying in the breeze, and a rustic little dock stretching into the lake. It seemed perfect. We arrived late Friday afternoon. The air smelled damp like moss and decaying wood. The lake glistened under the setting sun, but something about it made me uneasy. It was too still. No ripples, no fish jumping. Just a smooth, dark mirror that seemed to watch us. Emma brushed it off. "You're just not used to nature," she said, laughing. I smiled, but my stomach tightened. The cabin was just as advertised. Quaint, a little dusty, but homey. There was a guest book on the coffee table filled with notes from past visitors. Most were cheerful, great fishing, or the perfect escape. But a few were odd. One just said, "Don't swim, please." Saturday morning was beautiful. The sun cut through the trees and birds sang like they were welcoming us. Ethan begged to go swimming, and despite the warning in the guest book, Emma insisted it was fine. "Those notes are just a local superstition," she said, rolling her eyes. I stayed on the dock watching as Ethan splashed around. Lily lay on a towel scrolling through her phone, earbuds in. Emma joined me, dipping her toes in the water. For a while, it felt normal. Then Ethan screamed. At first I thought he was playing around, but the panic in his voice froze my blood. He thrashed wildly, his small hands slapping the water. I jumped in without thinking, my body cutting through the cold water like a knife. But when I reached the spot where he'd been, there was nothing. Just the suffocating silence of the lake pressing in on me. I dove again and again, lungs burning, heart pounding, but he was gone. When I surfaced, gasping, Emma was screaming his name from the dock. Lily stood frozen, tears coming down her face. The police arrived within an hour. They combed the lake with divers and search boats, but found no trace of Ethan. Not even his swim trunks. The sheriff, a grizzled man with sunken eyes, pulled me aside. "This lake has history," he muttered, lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. "People go missing. Always have. Locals say it's cursed." That night, the cabin felt different. The cheerful vibe from earlier was gone, replaced by a suffocating heaviness. Emma cried herself to sleep, clutching Ethan's favorite stuffed animal. Lily stared blankly out the window, whispering, "It's not over, Dad. It wants more." I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Around midnight I heard something. A faint whisper, like a voice carried on the wind. It sounded like Ethan calling for me. "Dad, help me." I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, the cool air biting at my skin. The lake was eerily calm, reflecting the moon like a polished mirror. But then I saw them. Wet footprints leading from the water to the cabin door. Small ones. Ethan's. By morning, Emma was a wreck. She insisted we leave, but the car wouldn't start. The engine sputtered and died no matter what I tried. Even my phone, which had worked fine the day before, now had no signal. We were trapped. The lake seemed closer. The shoreline, which had been a good 30 feet from the cabin, now lapped at the edge of the porch steps. Emma noticed it too. "We're not safe here," clutching Lily to her chest. By afternoon, the whispers grew louder. They came from everywhere, inside the walls, the trees, the water. Ethan's voice was the loudest. "Come play with me, Dad. It's fun here." And then we saw them. Faces, pale, distorted, just beneath the water's surface. Dozens of them, eyes wide with eternal terror, mouths open and closing like they were screaming underwater. They stared at us, unblinking, as if waiting. That night the whispers turned to banging. The walls shook and the floorboards groaned as if something massive pressed against them. Lily screamed, pointing to the window. A figure stood there. Its silhouette faint, but unmistakable. It was Ethan. Or something wearing his face. His eyes were black pits. His mouth stretched into an unnatural grin. The legends said the lake was cursed by a woman who drowned centuries ago, betrayed by her family. She lures the living into the water to share her pain, using those they love most as bait. I knew what I had to do. Grabbing a can of gasoline from the shed, I doused the cabin's perimeter and struck a match. The flames roared to life, and the whispers turned to deafening screams. The figure at the window melted away, replaced by a pale, gaunt woman with hollow eyes. She glared at me, her mouth forming silent words. "You can't escape." The fire bought us time. The car miraculously started, and we sped away, the lake's reflection fading in the rearview mirror. But the peace didn't last. Last night I woke up to the sound of dripping water. The footprints were back, leading from my bedroom door to the lake I thought I'd escaped. You can never escape. I've probably told this story 100 times, but no one ever believes me. I can't say I blame them. It sounds insane. But I swear on everything I have, it's the truth. And if you're smart, you'll listen. It was a Thursday when the shadows came. A normal day in Wrenwood. Population 3,742. I was working the late shift at Clark's Diner. The sun was setting, bathing the town in that soft orange glow that makes you forget how small and quiet it is. Then, right around 7:43 p.m., the light just disappeared. Not like a cloud passing over the sun, not like the night creeping in. It was instant. 1 second daylight, the next pitch black. At first I thought it was a power outage, but when I stepped outside, the streetlights weren't flickering. They were just gone. No moon, no stars, just a void so complete it felt like the world had been swallowed whole. My phone's flashlight barely cut through it, the beam fading after a few feet. That's when I noticed the darkness wasn't just around us, it was moving. I heard it before I saw it. It was a low, guttural whisper, like dozens of voices murmuring at once, coming from the direction of Main Street. Then the screams started. I ran toward the sound. Stupid, I know. But when you hear people screaming, your first instinct is to help. What I saw still makes my stomach turn. Mrs. Abernathy, the sweet old lady who ran the town's bakery, was lying in the middle of the road. Her eyes were wide, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. Around her, the shadows twisted and writhed, tendrils snaking toward her body. Before I could even yell for her to move, the darkness grabbed her. That's the only way to describe it. The shadows pulled her in, stretching her body unnaturally as her form disappeared into the void. One moment she was there, and the next, nothing. I froze, unable to look away. But then the shadows shifted, turning towards me. I didn't wait to see what they'd do next. I ran. By the time I reached the diner, the whispers were everywhere. Customers who had stayed behind were panicking, piling chairs against the doors and windows like they would stop the darkness. One guy, Joey, kept pacing back and forth, mumbling, "It's alive. It's watching us." He wasn't wrong. We tried calling for help, but our phones didn't work. Even the landline was dead. That's when it hit me. We were cut off, completely. Whatever this thing was, it had isolated us. Around midnight, we realized we weren't alone in the diner. It started with the shadows on the walls. They stretched, lengthened, and moved even though there was no light to cast them. Then, one by one, they began to crawl down to the floor. You ever felt like you were being watched? Multiply that by 100. The air in the diner grew heavier, colder, like the darkness was pressing in on us. People started whispering, arguing, accusing each other of bringing the curse to town. Joey snapped first, screaming at no one in particular, and bolting for the back door. We tried to stop him, but the moment he stepped outside, the darkness took him. It was fast. Tendrils wrapped around his legs, pulling him into the abyss. His screams echoed for a second, then nothing. Just silence. And that was when we realized the shadows weren't just waiting. They were hunting. We spent hours figuring out the rules. Light slowed them down, but only barely. Flashlights, candles, even the gas stove's flame. They all worked, but the shadows would always inch closer, as if testing our limits. By dawn, there were only 4 of us left. Marcy, a waitress, Glenn the cook, and a teenager named Danny who had been in the diner with his mom before the shadows took her. Danny was the one who discovered the thing they didn't like. Fire. Real open flame made them recoil. So we started lighting everything we could. Menus, napkins, even the cheap vinyl seats. It wasn't enough. The shadows were too many. Too strong. Around noon the next day, the whispers grew louder, more aggressive. The shadows began pounding on the windows, slithering through the cracks under the doors. We were out of options. Glenn suggested making a run for the water tower on the edge of town. It was high up and away from the ground where the shadows seemed strongest. It was a long shot, but it was all we had. We waited until the shadows pulled back momentarily. Then we bolted. Marcy didn't make it. She tripped and the darkness swallowed her before I could even turn around. Glenn and Danny made it to the tower with me, but Glenn was grabbed just as we climbed the ladder. I watched him fall. His screams cut off abruptly as the shadows devoured him. Danny and I spent 3 days on that tower, watching as the darkness consumed Renwood. The buildings, the trees, the roads, everything was erased. By the 4th day, the shadows receded, leaving nothing but an empty plain where the town had been. A rescue team found us a week later, dehydrated and delirious. They said no one else survived, that Renwood was gone. But they were wrong, because last night back in my apartment, I saw it. A shadow that shouldn't have been there, stretching unnaturally across my living room. And I heard the whispers again. The plague isn't over. It's just spreading. If you're hearing this, it means I survived. But don't mistake me for someone lucky. What I saw in that storm will haunt me for the rest of my life. And if you're ever caught in a blizzard that seems off, remember my story. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend at our family cabin. Me, my wife Sarah, our 16-year-old daughter Lisa, and my younger brother Jake. The forecast mentioned some light snow, nothing unusual for January in the Rockies. We'd planned on board games by the fire, hot cocoa, and maybe a hike if the weather held. By the time we arrived, the snow had already started, swirling lazily in the wind. The cabin was cozy, tucked away on a secluded mountainside. No neighbors, no distractions. Just us in the wilderness. We unpacked, lit the fireplace, and settled in. It felt perfect. Until it didn't. By nightfall, the snow had turned into a full-blown blizzard. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows and making the walls creak. Jake joked about The Shining, but something about the storm unsettled me. The snow wasn't just falling, it was pounding against the cabin like it was trying to get in. The power went out around 9 p.m. No big deal, we had lanterns and plenty of firewood. But as we lit the first lantern, Lisa noticed something outside. "Dad?" She whispered, her face pale. "There's someone out there." We crowded around the window. At first, I thought she was imagining things. But then I saw it. A figure standing motionless at the edge of the tree line. It was hard to make out through the snow, but it looked human. Too human. It didn't shiver or sway in the wind, it just stood there, staring at the cabin. Jake grabbed a flashlight and opened the door. "Hey!" he shouted into the storm. "You okay? You need help?" The figure didn't move. Jake shined the flashlight directly at it, but the beam seemed to bend around the figure, like the snow itself was shielding it. He slammed the door shut. What the hell was that? I didn't have an answer. That night, no one slept. The storm intensified and the figure vanished. But the whispers started. Faint at first, just a soft murmur carried by the wind. Then they grew louder, more distinct. Voices calling our names. Around 2 a.m., Sarah swore she saw somebody walking through the living room. But when I checked, there was no one there. Just footprints in the fresh layer of snow we'd tracked in earlier. Footprints that didn't match any of our shoes. By morning, the cabin was completely snowed in. The drifts covered the windows, and the front door wouldn't budge. Worse, the temperature had plummeted. The fireplace barely gave off any heat, no matter how much wood we burned. It felt like the cold was alive, seeping into our bones. That's when Jake started to change. Jake sat by the window, staring into the storm. He muttered to himself, his breath visible in the freezing air. When I touched his shoulder, he flinched, his eyes wild. "They're out there," he whispered. "They want us." Sarah tried to snap him out of it, but it was no use. He was obsessed with the figures we kept seeing. More of them now, scattered across the tree line. Each one stood perfectly still, watching. Their faces were pale, featureless, like mannequins carved from ice. By the second night, the whispers were inside the cabin. They echoed through the walls, growing louder until we couldn't tell if they were in our heads or real. Jake disappeared sometime after midnight. We found the back door open, snow blowing in. His footprints led into the storm, but not out. The next morning I saw him. Jake standing with the others. His face was twisted, unrecognizable. His skin blue-white like frozen marble. He opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Just a rush of icy wind that slammed into the cabin, shattering one of the windows. Sarah screamed as the cold poured in, and that's when the wraiths attacked. They didn't move like people. They glided, their bodies barely brushing the ground. They didn't have hands, just long, jagged appendages that looked like shards of ice. One of them reached through the window, its touch freezing the wood instantly. We barricaded the broken window of furniture, but the cabin felt like a trap. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every whisper felt closer. Lisa clung to me, sobbing, while Sarah kept staring at the door like she expected Jake to walk back in. By the third day, we were out of options. The food was gone, and the fire barely flickered. The storm had buried the cabin so deep that the walls groaned under the weight of the snow. And then we heard it. Jake's voice calling from outside. "It's safe now. You can come out." Sarah ran to the door before I could stop her. She unlocked it and the storm blasted in, nearly knocking us over. Outside, Jake stood, his hand outstretched, his face a mask of sorrow. "Don't," I begged her. "It's not him." But she didn't listen. The moment she stepped outside, the wraiths closed in, pulling her into the storm. Her screams faded almost instantly. It's just me and Lisa now. The storm has finally stopped, but the snow is unnatural. Crystalline, glittering like glass. The figures are gone, but I know they're still watching. I feel it every time I step outside. Last night, Lisa said she heard Sarah's voice, begging to come in. I told her to ignore it. She didn't speak to me after that. This morning I woke up to find her bed empty and the back door wide open. The storm is coming back. I can see the snow falling even though there are no clouds. And this time I don't think I'll survive. If you're hearing this, don't go to the mountains in winter. The blizzard isn't just weather. It's death. And it's waiting.